Hello, everyone. It's me, Andrew. I'm here in my home in lovely Ligonier, Pennsylvania. Hopefully, you all are doing well and that you're having a great Friday and that you've been creating and having a good time. We've been busy, busy, busy. This morning, early in this morning, we had to take the kittens to their vet appointment and then got their boosters, and I think they got their rabies shots this morning. So they were pretty good. You know, any trip like that is not my favorite, but it is what it is. We also checked out how much it's going to cost to get them fixed, which I was a little bit surprised with how much it was. But, I mean, our vet is very reasonable and affordable compared to some of the other vets. But yeah, I was like, holy cow. It's been a while since we had to get Babette fixed, and apparently prices have gone up in the 12 something years that she got her surgery. Um, so we did that this morning. William had some meetings in the afternoon where he was taking pictures of some stuff for somebody, and yeah, so we've been doing some different things around. They're actually at the cottage right now filming for tomorrow's tutorial. So it's been a bit of a hectic week, and so with the holiday and stuff, it's hard to believe that there was a holiday this week, but it kind of pushed everything back. So they're doing that tonight. So hopefully we'll have a Saturday morning tutorial with Jen tomorrow. And yeah, and I'm trying to think of what else. Oh, I see a couple people are watching. If you're watching, say hello. Maybe where you're tuning in from. It's always nice to hear where people are watching from. Michelle's watching. Hey, Michelle. Julie's watching. Hey, Julie. And that's the only people who are showing up so far. Um, yeah, so we've been busy. We've been getting ready for some different projects in the works. For me, I found out that I won a scholarship to go to the Baltimore Jewelry Center to work with Eric Burris. We're going to be doing Mocha Magane, and that's going to be um, next week, a week from today, actually. So, yeah, so I'm going to be doing that next weekend. I'm super excited. I have to book a hotel and all that. They originally had given me a scholarship to be there for an entire month as a bench, to have a bench there, but I can't unfortunately take off for an entire month especially this time of year. So unfortunately, I had to pass on that, but I'm glad that I got a chance. I'm going to have a chance to take a workshop with Eric since I had really wanted to take the class that he did at Touchstone. But we had some scheduling delay, some problems. So I unfortunately couldn't take it there. Um, but I am going to get to take it in Baltimore. So I'm super excited. I'm also really excited to check out the Baltimore Jewelry Center. It's not too terribly far away, at least according to Google Maps. According to Google Maps, it's like 3 hours away, which is not crazy far. Sometimes I am like, oh, let me pick up this hydraulic press, and it's like in rural Kentucky. Um, and or I'm like, let's go to Memphis, and in my mind, Memphis is close, and then it's like a 12-hour drive. So this is a 3-hour drive, and so it's not too terribly far. And they regularly host a lot of really wonderful artists who teach there. So who knows? I might start going to Baltimore more often. I mean, there's no shortage of good instructors around here, and hopefully we'll start bringing in more instructors for classes soon. So if you're a teacher, email us at info@allegorygallery.com, and we can maybe talk about hosting you this uh, for a class. It just depends on what you teach, because some things we don't have a space set up right just now. So it just depends, but yeah. Barbara says the Folk Art Museum in Baltimore is also amazing. The American Visions one, that one is really cool. I've been to that. And if I have time, if I leave early enough on Friday, maybe I'll try to go before the class, because it's an evening class on Friday and then Saturday and Sunday. So I'll try to squeeze in as much as I can while I'm there. Um, so I'm excited about that. I've always wanted to do mokumagane. I always thought it was such a cool technique. And when I saw it in person, I had this kind of visceral reaction. It was this really wonderful like combination of the different materials, and I thought that was really beautiful. So I'm super happy about that. I also won a scholarship to take a virtual workshop on with Metalworks on enameling steel with Ben Cook Akewa. I'm probably saying his last name wrong. I apologize. But yeah, so that will be exciting. That is also next week, and but it's virtual, so I can kind of hang out and at home and not have to travel for that. Now, a lot of times people say, "How do you get to do all these things?" And one of the cool things about a lot of the craft schools is that they offer scholarships to people, and all you have to do is apply. Maybe you get it, maybe you don't. I applied to several different ones, and sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. So thankfully, I've gotten these two, so I'm super excited. Um, and some of them, they cover different things. Like the one with Metalworks, it covers 75% of the tuition, and then you're responsible for the other 25%. And then with the Baltimore one, it was the whole thing, but they only do certain classes. So you just have to keep an eye out for those things if you're interested in taking workshops at different craft schools, because those things do come up, and you just have to. If I've learned anything from this kind of cycle of grant writing and scholarship applications and doing things like that, is to have an updated CV which is your kind of resume, your uh, um, and have a portfolio, you know. And so take good pictures, high quality pictures. I take a lot of stuff with my phone actually, and tweak things in Photoshop. But for the most part, once you have that image, you have it forever. And the thing that I cannot stress enough, because this is one of the most crazy making things, is make sure you document your work as you're making it. And I know that sounds crazy, but it helps so much. Um, so as you're making stuff, just keep I post things on my Instagram. It looks like I'm like, oh, this is what I made. And it is that, but it's also I list the name of the thing, how big it is, what the materials are, so that if I ever have any questions and I forget, then I can always go to my Instagram and just look, and then I know. But I also have started to take, as kind of one of the not very fun parts, it's like the administrative thing, but as you're making work, it's important to document that, because when it comes to submitting for different scholarships and grants and things like that, you have to know those things. They'll ask you for what's called an image script. And that's basically when they look at your images, they know what is what when. So they'll usually ask like the title, when it was created, what the materials are, and what the sizes are. So if you are interested in doing that, that's something I recommend keeping up with, because there's nothing quite as panic inducing as being on a deadline and then being all trying to scrabble around and find stuff. And then for me, I make a lot of work that I then sell. So I don't have a lot of work of my own work to then measure. And so it's super duper kind of um, awkward when you're like calling up people and be like, "Oh, could you measure the piece that's in your jewelry box?" So it's it's good to keep that on record, especially if you're going to be submitting stuff for exhibitions and things like that. So just a little bit of advice if you're going to do that. And I always have it ready to go. And then I just kind of plug and play where I just drop things in, and it makes it so much easier and less crazy making. I see a few more folks have tuned in. Julie says, yes, very expensive. I have 8 cats. Yeah, we were a little bit surprised. William sold Cornelius Pepper Pot. I don't know if you all remember that. If you've been following along with us for a while, then you may be aware of Cornelius Pepper Pot. But every year our town has a scarecrow contest, and I use a bunch of it's probably not good. I don't know. I've already shared pictures of how we made him. I basically took a lot of plastic bags that we had accumulated, especially after COVID, because when COVID hit, you couldn't bring in your reusable bags. I don't know if y'all remember that or not, but so they made you use a plastic bag, and we just accumulated bunches and bunches of bags. And so one of the things that I like to do, I don't like to waste stuff. And I know that some places will recycle them, but if I can recycle them, then that's another way of doing it. But anyway, so I basically made this skeleton of Cornelius Pepper Pot out of these plastic bags, and then did this paper mache on top, and then did layers of what's called the ultimate paper mache clay, which is a super sturdy clay that's made of toilet paper, linseed oil, and drywall compound and glue. So you make that clay, and it turns rock hard. So we finally decided, because we moved. Cornelius used to live on our porch, and that's how people found our house. But it was kind of weird also, because people would like stop and like take pictures of our house and different things like that. And I was like, oh, who's this stranger person kind of looking in the windows? And that's because Cornelius used to live on our porch. So we moved Cornelius to the store, and people kept asking and asking to buy him. But we're like, no, no, no. It's probably one of the last projects that Paolo was alive for. He was my little supervisor, and he would sit there and watch me do stuff. And at one point, he tried to jump on Cornelius's head, because he's a little pumpkin patch kid. But anyway, so we said, no, no, no. And then so finally somebody came through, and I guess it's all about timing. You never know. And they made an offer, and we couldn't say no. So Cornelius has moved on to their new home, and hopefully they enjoy him for a long time. And yeah, I kind of want to get back into making those big sculptures again, but they do take a lot of time. That's the thing; they take a while. And we basically turned our kitchen into like a hot box. because excuse me, some of the stuff it takes a while to dry. And if you don't dry it immediately, and if it's like damp or moist, it can get moldy. So our goal was to do it, have it dry out. So it was like a gajillion degrees, which is also probably why the cats were like sitting around while I was doing it. We did it in our kitchen, um, and so yeah, so they were kind of supervising, and we started another big sculpture, and we did it for the scarecrow contest, and it was a mushroom creature, and it was big. So we did it in the garage, and of course we had a cold snap then, and it was so cold. I was like, forget it, I'm not doing it. And so it's kind of been sitting in our garage, just hanging out. So maybe I'll actually finish it before it kind of completely falls apart. But yeah, it was so cold, and my fingers were not a fan of that. So we just kind of put it aside. I was like, oh well, we're not gonna put a scarecrow contest this year, maybe next year. And then it's like 2, 3 years later. But anyway, so maybe I'll finish that sometime this summer when it's actually warm. We'll see. And then I don't have to worry about like getting frostbite um, working the right. And normally I would do it like in the kitchen, even though that's not like the ideal thing. But it was so large that the mushroom cap part wouldn't fit through the door, even if we angled it sideways. So we had to do it in parts and then attach all the parts. And then once you attach all the parts, it's pretty much hard to do that. I was like, no wonder why I like jewelry. You can just pick it up and grab it and go. Um, and you don't have to figure out how you're going to haul things. I remember to get the Cornelius in place, we had to haul him. William picked up one end and I picked up the other, and we moved him all the way down to the Diamond, which is kind of like the downtown area of our town. So we did like a photo shoot in the cemetery because that was how we got there. You had to go through the cemetery, so it was very festive for our pictures. Um, Emily's watching. Hi, Emily. I haven't seen you pop up in a long time. Oh, Julie's from Brooklyn. We used to live in Brooklyn. That's actually where we moved before we lived here in Pennsylvania. The last place we lived was in Sunset Park. We slowly migrated. I started off in Manhattan, and then slowly got pushed and pushed until we finally ended up in Sunset Park, and then we really got pushed out of town, and we ended up here. Oh, Luanna's from Pittsburgh. And if you haven't stopped in to see us, you'll definitely have to stop in and see us. And Michelle is in California. Hey, Barbara. She says she's working and lurking. Oh, good. Don't you have a bunch of shows coming up? I don't know. I can't remember if you did the shows or if or if you've already done them or if they're coming up. Susie's watching. Hey, Susie. And a lot of folks are saying, congratulations on the workshops. Thank you. Jennifer says Cornelius was awesome. I'm sure he found a great home. Yeah, I hope so. I'm sure. You never know how things will go. I'm on Facebook. There's a group called Weird Secondhand Finds and stuff, and they're like, I don't know about y'all, but when I go to like the thrift store, I find like used panties and stuff, and they're like, oh, look at this undiscovered Frida Kahlo. Isn't that wild? Or they're like, look at this ceramic artist I found, and then you find out that it's like $1,400 cup, and I'm like, well, look at this. Anyway, so I always wonder like what will happen. And my work is a little bit weird, and so I kind of always imagined that someday that's going to pop up in one of those groups, um, and that'll be fun, I guess. If it does, I'm not going to be mad because some of those people, once they get their work featured in that group, it like breaks people's website. There's so many people who watch. So yeah. So if anybody wants to post any of my work in the secondhand finds group, I'm not gonna be mad about it. Anyway, so I tried to wink y'all. That wasn't a facial twitch of my face. So if you're wondering what I was doing. Teresa's watching. Hey Teresa. Julie says she was born in Sunset Park. Yeah, we liked it. It's different now. We looked up the old apartment that we lived in last, and it has been since renovated out, and now it's like a luxury apartment. And part of me wishes that we had kept it and like subletted the apartment, because it would have been super nice to be able to like go back. And also, people, I don't know about y'all, but I don't know how anybody affords rent anymore, um, in a big city like that, because it was not crazy expensive when we lived there, which it was still a lot, but not that much. But we checked the rent and it had like gone up $1,000. Like, how I was like, they must have made it real nice. Anyways, Cheryl's watching. Hi, Cheryl. And Bonnie's watching. Hey, Bonnie. So if you did not see, go on ahead and use that coupon code if you're able to in the online store. That's allegorygallery.com. The code is 1776, and it is you get 21% off of everything on the online store. Um, Somebody asked us, I think yesterday or the day before, I can't remember, why we didn't do sales in the physical store. And one of the reasons why is that the physical store costs more to operate than the online store. I don't know if y'all know about such things, but the overhead that we have at the physical store costs 3 times as much as what it costs us to sell something, the same exact item, in our online store. So, and we try to keep all of our prices as low as possible and comparable. And we'll always try to make sure that everybody gets the best deal that they can get. So our margins are way slimmer in the physical store as opposed to the online store. So in the online store, we can offer more sales and more regularly because we have a little bit more of a little bit of wiggle room. Ultimately, we can't have sales all the time because the money that the sale comes out of is the money that we live off of. So we can't always do that because we have to pay our own bills. So anyway, we got kittens to take care of. So yeah. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that because William had said that it was because things cost more online, and I don't necessarily think that that's 100%. Maybe they cost a little bit more, but not enough that it's that dramatic of a difference. They do cost more between when we do a selling event as opposed to putting them in the online store because it costs more to do that. So usually you can, if you're interested in getting like the best deals, our selling events are probably the place to get the best deals because we don't have as much overhead built into that. So, anyways, that's just something to think about if you're interested in that. I don't want to bore people with the minutiae of running a small business, but there you go. Bonnie says, I like your pin. Thanks. This pin, I don't know where it is. This pen, it's made by an artist named Sulubi. They live in Texas and they make amazing work. They were in the We Are Here exhibition that I was also in Memphis. They had 2 pieces in the show, and they do a lot in the contemporary jewelry world. So, yeah, I was super fortunate. I won this in a raffle for Crafting the Future. So that was a wonderful surprise. We helped raise money for Crafting the Future, which helps boost BIPOC voices in the craft community, which is a really wonderful program. It's something that's super important, and I'm glad that we were able to help, and that I also got a pin as like a reward too, but that was like kind of separate. Anyways, so yes, so we have the sale going on in the online store. So if you haven't had a chance to take advantage of that, you can save 21% using coupon code 1776. It's our 4th of July sale. And so there you go. Also, we are celebrating this month. The month of July is the Summer of Fantasy. You don't necessarily have to do the prompts in order. I saw somebody say, oh, I'm too busy right now. I can't do it. And I said, the internet doesn't go bad. Excuse me. You can make prompts for whatever day you want, whenever you want it. And nobody's going to look at like your timestamp and cross-reference it and send you a demerit if you're 1 minute past midnight. We're pretty loosey-goosey. I know for me, I do not thrive when I have a lot of pressure on myself. I mean, like some pressure because goals are good. But when it comes to like panic, I used to work in a restaurant and I still have nightmares about the expo station and like the tickets constantly coming up. So I try not to impose that onto other people. Some people really do well with it. And if you are one of those people who does well with hard deadlines, you can impose as many deadlines on yourself as you want. And the infrastructure of the Summer of Fantasy prompts is set up in a way that you can really take advantage of that format. So today for the Summer of Fantasy is to use copper to create some earrings. So I thought that we would do that today. How about that? I don't know how far, if I'm going to be able to finish all the earrings during the live. I'm probably going to show how to do one bezel, a seed beaded bezel, and then we'll move on. I'll move on and just replicate it. If it goes pretty quick, then I'll do it on live. But generally speaking, when I make earrings, I just show one and then finish them off camera. The other thing that I wanted to mention is if you're interested in watching me talk about my work at the Memphis Metals Museum, I'm going to be doing a Zoom talk on Sunday, the 9th, and I'll post the information on my personal timeline because I don't remember offhand. And you have to pre-register for the links. And there's, I think, 13 other artists who are participating. So if you did not get to go to the show or you wanted to find out more about it, about the pieces in the show, check it out. I'm super excited because not everybody was able to attend the opening. We were super fortunate, and we were able to go to Memphis for the opening and talk about the work that I put in the show, which I kind of realized I didn't actually talk about the work as much as I could have. I talked about like body adornment in general, and then I invited people to talk to me about what their impressions of the piece were, which I think is kind of fascinating. I don't know if y'all know, like, know this about me, but I kind of, um, I don't know. I kind of like to hear what other people think about the stuff that I make. I think like when I'm in my home and I'm making stuff, or I'm in my studio and I'm making stuff, I have a lot of things going on in my brain, and I talk a lot. There's no shortage of things that I'm thinking about while I'm making stuff. I oftentimes think about, the materials that I'm working with and their symbolic usage and how to, using the ingredients that are going to amplify the message of the work that I make to the best effect possible. And so in my mind, there's always something going on. And I also listen to audiobooks. See, I didn't say book on tape. Um, and so I also have that going on in the back of my mind as well. So there's a lot of things I think about, but I realize that once my work leaves my hands and goes out into the world, it takes on a new life. So, I can have all the intentions I want, but ultimately, I'm not going to be there's not a little Andrew that goes along with each of my pieces and be like, well, this is the juxtaposition of this color as this thing is a symbolic representation of blah, blah, blah. So I always am fascinated about what other people think because I think that it becomes a dialogue. I mean, as long as it's like, not, and even when it like I was gonna say as long as it's not nasty, like if people get mean, but even that is sometimes interesting to me because um, everybody has different experiences, and you know I think one of the things that I've had to kind of develop as an entrepreneur, especially an entrepreneur who has a social media presence, is that it's developing a thick skin, and sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes people say things that are kind of hurtful, and you're like, wow, that was really nasty. But sometimes I think that it can be an interesting perspective to see, I don't know, see the work in a different light. So even if I don't like what somebody else has to say, sometimes, you learn more about the world through those conversations. So, I mean, I would definitely not recommend having nasty interactions all the time, but sometimes it's actually, somewhat insightful and you can kind of grow and learn from those conversations. So, anyways, um, Teresa says, I got my special beads from you today. They are gorgeous. Oh, goody. I think I have something that still needs to hitch a ride with one of your packages. Um, I always I don't know if y'all do this or not. Who if you have an online store, but I have different little piles around, and it's like, oh, I think this person will like this, and so sometimes I sneak things into their packages, and I'm sure it drives Barb crazy because I'm like, here, can you put this in this one, and then can you put this in that one, and there's no like paper trail that goes along with it, so that's fun and exciting for Barb. Um, Cindy's watching. Hey, Cindy. All right. So I talked about the sale. I talked about Summer of Fantasy. I talked about my talk on Sunday with the Metal Museum. And tomorrow morning, if all things go well, we're going to have another tutorial with Jen. So keep your eyes peeled for that. William said that she's going to be doing some more simple stuff, so that should be a lot of fun. Sometimes I like when she does the more basic, simple stuff because then, it's a good refresher on things. And even though Jen and I, sometimes do similar things with like wire, actually, she does stuff that's way different than I do. But what I've found is that even though we both work with the same materials, is sometimes somebody will make stuff that in a completely different way than you do. And even if it's a basic skill, it's sometimes interesting to see how other people do it so that, either you are a confirmation of why you do it the way you do it. I've seen lots of things of I'm like, why are they doing it like this? It's so much easier if you do it this way. Um, or it's one of those things where it kind of opens like a aha moment where you can then adapt your own practice and do something easier or do it in a way that it makes more sense. So if there's basics, um, even if you're a long time maker, I always think it's good to check those out because sometimes it's good to see things through a different perspective. And let's see what else. If there's anything else I'm forgetting, I'm sure there's something else that I'm forgetting to mention. Whenever we do these kind of updates in the beginning of the videos, I know some people are like, oh my gosh, I'm not in town, I don't care. But I like to do that in the beginning of the videos to kind of give people a chance to filter in and also to keep up to date with what we're doing too, because we do a lot of stuff and sometimes you can forget what you're doing. So we have a bunch of projects that we're working on in the background, and hopefully you all will see those soon, and we'll update as it progresses. All right, so I'm going to flip the camera around, and then we'll get going. All right. We're going to do a little math today, um, believe it or not. So keep your eyes, get ready for that. Who's ready for some math? Um, you don't actually have to do math if you don't want to do math. I see Pam's watching. Hey, Pam. All right. You can see our messy table. I need to organize as I go because I haven't been finishing up a lot of my projects. Bias says, I wish I was good with numbers. I think it's like anything, you just practice and you can make it so. I think a lot like when I was growing up, um, people assumed that because I was Asian that I was good at math and I could do the work. I just never enjoyed it. And then there were times when people were like, "Oh, you're so dumb" or whatever. And so or you're an artist, you can't do math. And so there was always this kind of like chip on my shoulder about that. So if you are struggling with it, just know that, like all things, it just takes practice and patience and a desire to learn. And if you're struggling with numbers or whatever, you can always get better if that's something that you want. Unless that, there issue. I think part of my thing is that I'm a little bit, I don't know, I haven't actually been diagnosed with this, but numerically dyslexic is a thing. And sometimes for me, like when I hear numbers, it kind of gets jarbled up. So, like, it takes me forever to learn different numbers. Like my phone number, it took me such a long time to remember my phone number. And like whenever we're at a show or something and somebody's talking about a certain thing, I have people write it down so that I don't get completely lost in the wind. Anyway, so um, I have these really cool vintage plastic, metal coated plastic. I know some people hate plastic. There's a lot of reasons why people don't like it. I can understand it. For a long time, I was not into vintage or into plastic at all. But as I've matured as an artist, I kind of have this feeling that the it's not so much the material, but what you do with the material that matters. And for me, vintage plastic is such a beautiful and versatile material that is like a chameleon. You can have it look like almost anything. It can be super strong. it comes in a lot of different formulas. Um, and there's a lot of things people say things are certain things. They're like, oh, these are miracle beads. Well, it's basically plastic with a special coating. Um, surprise, surprise. And there are things like, oh, I'm only interested in Bakelite, which is very expensive nowadays, but you know what it is? It's plastic. So, yeah. So I have quickly learned not to have a prejudice against plastic. And there are people who are like, oh, well, I'm only interested in what the great designers use. And there are people who are like Miriam Haskell, who use plastic in her work. Renee Lalique, who is probably one of the most like influential Art Nouveau jewelry designers who people lose their mind over, experimented with early celluloid. So again, it's all what you do with it. I think it's a really wonderful product that you can then, well, depending, like sometimes there's good plastic and then sometimes there's bad plastic, but especially vintage plastic if you can find it. And there's a place here in Pennsylvania, they're no longer in business, but they were in the business of coating plastic and with metal. And it was probably an electroplating kind of process. And so I think it's cool because then you can have a solid piece or something that looks like a solid piece of metal, but it doesn't weigh a ton. And it still has the reactions that regular metal has because there is a thin layer of metal. Now, not all the time will the metal react. Because sometimes the metal is then coated with like a sealant. So you do have to kind of experiment. I've had pieces that I can patina. Um, Christy Friesen, she has a line of products called Swelligant, and there are a lot of different chemicals that can be used to patina the metal. Now, a patina is a chemical reaction with the metal and uh, something else. So it could be the air and it could be oxidizing. So rust is a patina. When you get iron or steel wet, there's a chemical reaction between that and the air, and it oxidizes and creates rust. With bronze and brass, whenever there is acid introduced to it, it creates a chemical patina or a chemical reaction that creates verdigris, which is that green color. Some things are actually toxic when that happens. So verdigris, don't be licking any green sculptures out there in the world because that's not safe to do so. It's a little bit poison, y'all. Copper also has that. Um, and there's different things that you can do. But anyways, and like if you want to have a bright blue, you can mix ammonia and salt, and it creates this very beautiful blue. And there's different metals that will react. So, anyways, with some of these metal coated plastic, they will react, and then sometimes they won't because they've been coated. So you kind of have to experiment if that's something that you're interested in exploring further. All right. Anyway, so here's this. This is a cabochon that has been copper plated plastic. I think is pretty cool. I'm going to use this because, again, it's lightweight and looks like a piece of copper, but isn't super heavy. So the math that we're going to do today is um, we're going to be busting out the middle school math, maybe elementary school, depends on what kind of school you went to. And we're going to be figuring out the circumference of our cabochon. So whenever you're doing the circumference of a cabochon, you're going to want to pick the widest part because this is flat back. It's easy. It's this size. whenever you're working with like a stone that's like a cut stone, there are different parts of the stone. There's like the pavilion and the girdle and the coulee, which means the butt of the stone or the point of the stone. And so you measure the widest part. So for this, we're going to measure this like so. And this is 20 millimeters across. You can do this in inches if you want, but I find that when you're working with stones like this or cabochons on a smaller size, it's way easier to do it in metric because it's in denominations of 10, and then you don't have to do like, it's not, you don't have to do all this like, oh, well, if Prince Henry decided to have a gallon of milk in 1776. How big is this bushel of corn fluff? I don't know. I'm just making stuff up. But anyway, so I'm going to draw this out so you can see it. So if this is your cabochon and you need to find out the circumference, which is the size all the way around, you measure this distance across. This is the diameter. And then you multiply, the circumference is the diameter times pi. And pi is 3.14. And then some extra numbers. But for the most part, my measuring equipment doesn't go that small when it starts getting into the extreme decimal time. So if you multiply, if this is going to be 20 millimeters, and then you multiply it by pi, then, it's going to be, when I multiplied this by pi earlier, it became 62.83 around. So that's one way that you can figure out the circumference of your piece. And so what I do is then I have these handy dandy calipers. Be careful with these because if you slide your finger, sometimes these are sharp. Because they're machined, so they're precision machine things, so sometimes they're sharp. So there's a little bump here, and use that little bump to slide it. Don't just slide it with your finger, because I had like double cuts on my fingers from that. So sometimes I'll set my calipers to how big I need it, and then I just keep that on my workstation as a reference. Now, the silly thing about this process is that we do need to know this, how the circumference of the piece, but we're actually going to go over the circumference of the piece because when you figure that out, when you figure that you're making a bezel with a three-dimensional object. It's not like perfectly flat. So you do have to accommodate for the sizes of the beads. And so we actually have to go over that size, the 62.83, which is basically 63. So that whenever you bend it around and it conforms to your cabochon, you're actually gonna it's actually gonna fit around it. Now, another way of figuring this out, if you are like, I don't want to do math, I got a ruler, but I don't have a calculator. I'm not going to do that multiplication. Another way that you can figure that out is to take some kind of string or cording and take your piece and wrap it around the base of your cabochon. And then whenever you have that, where it meets up, then you measure it. And oh, look, it's that same size. So if you don't want to do the math, there are ways around that. But if you aren't one of those math people, there you go. That's how you figure out the circumference of a circular object. And it doesn't necessarily, I mean, that works for a circle. If you're working with like weird shapes, like if you have like a pear shape or something, I I default to the measuring with a string method because I don't know that how to do that math with figuring out all those extra like points and squiggles and stuff. So, but that's the way you figure out a circle. So there you go. Um, Pam says, "Have you done a video tutorial on patinas?" I've done patinas in the past, but I don't know if I have done anything specifically. So that's a good idea of something to do. All right. So since today's prompt is to work with copper to make a pair of earrings, I picked out this copper kind of, and this is kind of weird because it does look like a fisheye thing, so you can kind of see me working in the reflection of that, which is kind of trippy. But anyway, so I figured we would use some. Um, these are size 8 metal seed beads. And these ones are real copper. So they are not copper plated, but they're solid sheet metal that's been used in a machine that makes that shape, and then they're folded, which is pretty wild when you think about it. There's all these ginormous machines that are like 10,000 pounds, and they do all these tiny things. But because of the way they're hollow, so they're lightweight, so they're conformed using. I don't actually know how. With the seamless ones, I know that they take like a tubing, and then they have it. Run through this machine that folds down the edges and cuts at the same time. With these ones, I think that they're turned into almost like a synclastic form, or is it anticlastic, and then they're then folded again. So I think that's pretty wild when you think about this giant machine making these tiny parts. I always think that's so fascinating because it's so different from what I do with my handmade stuff. um, so anyways, we're gonna need some size 8 seed beads. If you don't have these metal ones, you can use regular size 8 seed beads. We're also gonna need some 15s. I have this in this kind of cool kind of antique kind of bronze kind of, there's, I don't know. I don't know the color exactly of that, but it's kind of an old gold color. And these ones I think are actually kind of like a like a topaz that has a gold, the kind of a berry color topaz, like a warm, almost like a root beer, and then it's got a gold finish on it, so it gives that old kind of coppery look. And then we also need some size 11s, and I think I'm gonna go with this kind of matte, pearly, kind of silvery, kind of goldish white electrum color. And I got those from our friend Leslie Pope, who has Twisted Sister beads. And yeah, so these are the size 11s. And so I have the size 8O, 11O, and 15O. Now for this project, we're going to need a needle and some thread. I'm going to use some Fireline. I have this spool going, so you're going to see the spool in all the projects I make, basically, until it runs out. And then I'll go hunting around and dig for something else. But I like it because it's a little bit sturdier. Sometimes people, they like a more drape to their projects. And then I would say use like a silk or Nymo or something like that. But and my needle is a size 10, but you could also go up to or down to a size 12. So 10 to 12 in the size of this needle. And it's a beading needle. So they're longer than than like sewing needles they call them shorts. And these ones are longer. So you can pick beads up a little bit easier and your fingers aren't in the way. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is, Pam says, I use a tape to wrap around the circumference of the cabochon and then cut it off and lay it flat to measure. Yeah, that's another technique of doing it. It's the same idea as with the string. It's just using tape instead. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna pick up 1, 2, 3, 4 of these size 8 seed beads. I'm going to walk them down close to the end of my thread. I'm going to leave myself a little bit of a tail, maybe 4 or 5 inches, so that I can sew that back in. Some people, they cut stuff real close to the end. Oh, I forgot to show you this. This is my finished-ish version of the Russian spiral that I showed the other day. I actually had a problem where I was kind of in a rush to tie everything off, and I accidentally cut one of the threads, and then a whole section came loose. So then I had to patch that by reinforcing it with some extra thread. So this piece is going to be like indestructible by the end of it. But to finish that off, I'm just going to run a thing of beading wire. Another thing that I was thinking about using is some ball chain and use that for the ends. But I don't really have the little clasp part for the ball chain. But anyway, so I start out 4 of these size 8 metal seed beads, and I'm going to just tie an overhand knot. And I'm going to make another knot to really lock it in place. And I'm going to fold it over again. And that's going to create my little unit there for this the start of technically right angle weave. All right. So I've got there's 4 of them. And you're going to want to make sure that you keep it. So tension is super important. You want it tight enough that it holds its shape, but you don't want it so tight that they won't move at all. Because when you're getting your needles in and stuff, sometimes if it's too rigid and there's no flexibility, it makes it real hard to do anything. And this will eventually need to be wrapped around your stone. So that's important to do that it's not too tight, because then basically you made a bookmark instead of a bezel. All right, so my thread is coming out there. I don't want my thread to end up being where my knot is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and go up through the bead next to it. And I'm going to go into the next bead around. And all that does really is it just makes it so that it's not, the knot is not necessarily, you're not working from where the knot is, because then it will create a weak spot. So that, and also the other reason of doing that is it keeps the tail out of the way, which is also nice. All right. Sylvia says, what size of fire line are you using? This is an 8-pound smoke. All right. So I'm going to pick up 1, 2, 3 of these size 8 seed beads. And since I'm coming up out of this bead here, I'm going to go up through it again. So I'm going to make a loop basically. So coming up through the top, I'm going to go up through the bottom and go out the top again. And I hold my work with my thumb and forefinger like so. And then you have this, all right? And then, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and go through this bead, and then I'm going to exit out through this bead. So this is kind of weird to show this like this, but because I don't want to put my hand in the way. But I've got this. I'm going to go through there, and then I'm going to go through here. So this is basic right angle weave. And then so all I do is continue this, adding 3 beads at a time until I reach my length. All right, since I'm coming out of the bottom here, I'm gonna go down through the top here and out through the bottom. And there you go. And then I want to exit out here. So I'm going to go through this bottom bead and then not get it caught on the camera stand, which I just did. And then up through that side bead. You do want to play with the tension so that it's nice and tight and you don't have anything super loose. But again, you don't want that super tight either. So this was kind of gaping at the bottom here. I don't know if you all saw that or not, but it was kind of gaping. So I just lightly tugged it and that kind of pulled up the tension. Every once in a while, I'm going to increase, make sure that it's not too loosey-goosey. Also, if you pull too tight, then the beads will want to flop around, and they'll go and they'll like squeeze down. So you just have to play around with it to get that right tension. Otherwise, it will be too tight or too loose, and it won't have that kind of cross shape, that equal arm cross shape that we're looking for. All right, so I'm going to add 3 beads and repeat. So basically, this is the boring part where I just show you the same thing over and over. And if this was an evergreen video, then you wouldn't have to watch this. If I was really good, I would do all these in step outs, and then you don't have to watch. But at least you're gonna see it in real time, and then you'll know just how long it takes to do this. And I'm sure that, like, you know, a lot of you have a lot of seed beading experience. So right angle weave basic is probably, you already probably know how to do this. But for those of you who don't, this might be a good kind of opportunity to, to maybe do it. I was very intimidated with, with the size or with the right angle weave for a long time. And I don't know why, because it's not, once you know the stitch, it's not actually that hard. But for a long time, I was like, oh, I don't know how to do that. So I just stuck to other stitches. I think it's one of those things where once you know how to do it, like any kind of foundation stitch, it's a good thing to build on. So you can take these basic stitches and incorporate them in really cool ways, to make them your own. And depending on the beads you use, it'll change the look, all kinds of things like that. So I definitely encourage you that once you get these kind of basics down, to explore and experiment and really push your own creativity. One of the things that I love about what we do, especially with the inspiration kits that we make, or used to make, is that people get kind of the same ingredients, but how you mix them and what you mix them with will really determine, the outlook. Now, I kind of slackened up on my tension here, so I'm just going to go back through and kind of tighten things up and pull this, so that any place that it's loose, it will tighten up, and I'll have a nice sturdy band going forward. It does kind of, I always feel like with CB projects, you kind of have to have a little bit of faith that things will work out, because there's a lot of times when things are super loosey goosey, to begin with, especially, and it doesn't feel secure. But the more you add to the stitches and stuff, the stronger it gets. All right, so I'm coming out the bottom there, so I'm going to go down through the top. I'm holding this pretty firm because I don't want the tension to get wonkadoodle. It's a very technical term, but if you can keep it sturdy, then you don't have to constantly adjust it. I know that when you're just watching it, it kind of looks like I'm just like, playing with my fingers or something, but it is good to have that kind of tension as you're going so that you're not constantly adjusting. And all I'm doing is just adding 3 beads at a time to form that sort of equal arm cross shape with the beads. And this is a basic right angle weave that we're doing here. All right. And if you have to flip your work, flip your work. But I generally, when I'm working with right angle weave, I try to keep it so that I don't flip my work too much, because sometimes you can get things twisted. One thing that you do have to be mindful of is, because you're creating these kind of cross-like shapes, sometimes those beads stick out in a way that they stick out. So these top row and the bottom row there, they kind of stick out. So when you're pulling your thread, it's super important that you're mindful that you're pulling it taut all the way, because sometimes the thread can get caught up on those little top beads or bottom beads, and then you'll have this extra thread that then you have to go back and either take stuff out, or you have to like adjust it and pull and do different things to get those loops out. So just keep that in mind, because that's one of the most common things that I see is when the thread gets snagged on the beadwork itself. And for me, my thread snags on everything around me. So that's another perk of being more tidy in your studio or wherever you're working, is then you have less likely to get things caught up on it. I feel like in my work area, my thread is like magnetically drawn to the cross locking, the box joint of my pliers. Like if I have pliers laying around, it's like the thread is like the siren song of the pliers is like too hard for the thread to resist, and I almost always inevitably catch the thread on my pliers. So that's something to be aware of. I catch stuff going around on different things. So I'm just continuing this. I have to have at least 63 millimeters um, of this right angle weave band. I need at least 63 millimeters, and then a little bit extra to go around my cabochon. So this one does take a little bit more time than some of our other projects that we've kind of done together. I mean, actually, I don't know. Some of the projects y'all have been sat with me for like 3 hours. Um, but once you get going, it's pretty quick. And if you don't have a camera in your way, then actually those are really fast. But I want to make sure that you all can see that when you're working. So I'm picking up 3 more beads and just continuing this around until I get to the lengths that I want. And then we'll talk more about stuff as we go. So hopefully you all have a good weekend this weekend. Do you all have any plans for this weekend or tonight? Any weekend plans? William and Jen are at the cottage. They're filming the Saturday tutorial right now. I don't know. What have I been doing? I've been trying to finish up a lot of seed beading projects that I started. So I have a little handful of projects that I started on camera that I would like to finish. So I've been working on those in the background, and we've been the kittens pretty much take up a lot of our time now. I mean, not a lot, but we do like spending time with them so that they're cute. Why not, right? So I'm just going to continue. I'm almost to length here. Bonnie says, always stick my finger. I have a memorial service for my dad's cousin in another town. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Hopefully you have a, sometimes memorials are nice because then people can gather and remember people, and it can be, it's weird to say this, but sometimes they can be fun. It depends what kind of people y'all are. Because I've been to, somewhere the memorial is like the most gut wrenching pain ever. And then there are other times that I've gone where it's kind of festive and people almost use it as a reunion to catch up. But anyways, hopefully, our thoughts are with you. Michelle says, need a new shelf, cables, got our truck tires on, alignment done. Michelle said, no plans for going out. We just got our new router. So now we need the new shelf, the cables, and got your truck tires on, alignment done. And Teresa says, making 75 sea glass sailboats to get ahead of orders. Oh, good. Bunny says, I haven't seen these people in many years, so it'll be fun. Actually, oh, good. And Michelle says, so busy with that kind of stuff. Yeah, we have a lot of maintenance that we do over the summer with the various properties. And I always feel like I'm behind. Eventually, we'll get help to do certain things. But until then, we have to do them ourselves. And that's not always conducive to having free and easy time. All right. So I'm going to go a little bit past the 63 millimeter mark. And the reason why is that the beads, they take up space, right? So the bead thickness you also have to factor that in, because if you just go only up to 63 millimeters, it's not going to go all the way around. So at first, it's going to look a little bit weird. You're going to be like, hey, that doesn't line up at all. But see, that's what we've got going on. It's going to go a little bit past that. Now, when you reach the end of your row of the right angle weave, you do have to make sure that your tension's relatively tight. And then I fold over my beadwork and make sure that it's not twisted. If it's twisted, you're gonna have trouble. I was gonna say something else, but this is PG rated, PG-13 rated, so I can't be using the expressive language that I usually would. And you pick up one bead, you go through. Since this is folded over, I don't know if y'all can see that or not. I folded it over so that they're next to each other. My thread's coming out through here, so I'm going to want to go through here. I picked up one seed bead, and I'm going to go up through that one. And then I'm going to pick up another one of these, size 8, and I'm going to go down through this one. All right. So what that does is it completes the loop, and you have a loop here. So if you wanted to do just like a beaded loop, there you go. That's how you do that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do basically peyote stitch on top of this. And so when you look at the structure of this, there are all these little gaps. And when you fill that in, that's basically peyote stitch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this size. Actually, I think I'm going to use um, I'm going to do one row of the I'm going to do one row of the size 8 seed beads before I get into any kind of decreases. So I want to make sure that my thread is coming out through one of the top beads, and then I pick up a bead, and then the next bead, next top bead, I'm going to go through that bead. This is really wonderful when you're doing this because it will stiffen up this work. All right. It will make it less loosey-goosey, and it will, wherever there's the tensions kind of lax, it will help bring that in. So I'm just picking up a bead and inserting it in that kind of gap. And technically, that's not right angle weave anymore. It's a peyote. In case y'all are keeping score at home there. So I'm just picking up beads and going around this circle. And I'm pulling it kind of tight as I'm going. Again, not too tight, but again, not too loose. Just right, Goldilocks style. And this is what I'm doing now is bulking up this is actually going to be the front of the bezel. All right. Michelle says now it's raw with stitch in the ditch. Well, that's one way of calling it. All right, so I'm just making my way around. I don't know if I have to find any more of these copper seed beads. But what we're doing is we're strengthening it up, and it's forming a little bit more structure in the piece, and you're going to actually see it tighten up significantly. And we're almost all the way around, so hopefully I will need more of those, so hopefully I have more somewhere around here. You do need more of these size 8s than probably anything else. The other ones, you only need like a scattering of them. And yeah, so I'm just going all the way around and completing the circle. I'm almost to the end. And not quite. I need to go find some more. All right. So let me see. Usually, I don't know if I used up them all. I've got more. Thank goodness. So this is there ever a time that loosey-goosey is appropriate or a good thing? Yeah, sometimes when you're doing like a netting and you're trying to conform it to something, you do want it to be a little bit loose. And then as you go through multiple times, that loosey-goosiness will tighten up and is actually kind of, you have to work with it. I mean, and then some people do stuff with thread. I don't know, I don't like to show thread because I was always taught that having exposed thread created weakness in your work. But there's an artist who does all this amazing kind of peyote stitch with glass beads, and then she takes a hammer after she's made this stuff and bangs out some of the parts of it, and it does this really cool kind of drapery. I don't know, it kind of hangs kind of funny, but it's super beautiful. It's so I don't ever think I've seen anybody do that. All right, so when I've reached the end of my row, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this bead, and then to go to the next row, I have to step up. So my needle is going to go in. I don't know if you can see this. It's going to go in here, and then I'm going to go through this top one. So that steps up to the next row. All right. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this tail out the way. And then I'm going to pick up, this is going to be the decrease, y'all. So I'm going to pick up a size 11, and then I'm going to go through the next bead. And this is basically a peyote stitch that we're doing, where whenever there's a bead sticking up, we're going to put that through the next bead. So I'm picking up an 11-0 and then going through the next one. Michelle said seed beading, it's seed beading fun. Yeah, you know, I always got a little bit intimidated by increases and decreases in my beadwork. And I think that some people have that issue as well, maybe. I don't know. But when you work with these beads, you can kind of see things happening. And yeah. So the more you work with them, the less intimidating it becomes. Right now, there's a lot of gap in where the 11s meet the 8s. And we're going to have to address that by adjusting some of the tension of this. And I'm going to add these as I go. You do want to start conforming it. So you're going to want to start pulling, like this is going to curve in. So you do want to start kind of training the beadwork to just start doing that, because otherwise it's going to be super gappy and then it's not going to want to do it. So just keep that in mind so that you're pushing the beads in the right direction. Michelle says, I think seed beading is fascinating. You can do so much with them. Yeah, I think I agree. I used to be really hesitant about doing seed beading because, for one, it takes a while. You know, there's with stringing, you can like bust out a project in minutes. With seed beading, it takes more time. And when I was younger, I just didn't have that much time to devote to these projects. So I didn't naturally gravitate towards it because I didn't really have time to do the more elaborate things that took more time. So as I've gotten older, I've been able to have more flexibility in what I do and how I do it. So I can do things like this and not, feel pressured, because for me, there's always a big kind of, I have to do something that's going to be monetized, and how am I going to contribute to the family or whatever. And so anyways, all right, so I've gotten all the way around, and then I'm going to step up into the next row. These are kind of flaring out, which is not ideal. It should be kind of the opposite, where this is going in. As we do this next row, it's really going to bring stuff together. So I've come out through this seed bead, this size 8 seed bead here. I'm going to go up through that size 11 that's in the next kind of row. And then I'm going to take this size 11, and I'm going to continue around. So this is the next bead. I'm going to go into my next size 11 bead, and this is where it's really, you're going to have to start pulling it. And this is where it's really going to start decreasing. You do have to use a little bit of pressure, and it is going to kind of warp it a little bit as you're working, but you just kind of have to have that faith, like I said, that it's all going to work out, because right now it looks a little bit hot mess style, but as you pull, you can start seeing that it's starting to distort the shape of this. This is no longer a band. We're making the bezel, and this will help keep the cabochon in place. Now, this is pretty much one of the easiest bezels you can do. There are other ones that are a little bit more complicated. You know, I don't do this actually, to be honest, a whole heck of a lot. Because I do a lot of more metal smithing now. But this is a basic way that you can capture a stone. The reason why I'm doing it like this is you could do this in a couple different ways, because there is no like back there to my cabochon. In theory, I could have used some lacy stiff stuff and did my bezel that way. Gluing my bezel down and then doing the beadwork around it. But this way is if you have like generally if you have a weird shape where it's not perfectly flat on the back, or you know, you have a little bit more, you can do that. It's for when you have shapes that aren't completely flat on the back. You can use this as a way to capture the stone or the whatever the cabochon that you're working with, the pendant, and it won't. You don't have to have it be flat on the back. This piece, just because of what I'm using, is flat on the back, but yeah. There's other people, they use felt or micro suede as their backing, and that is a little bit easier to do than the right angle weave, but it's not incredibly more difficult. So I would think that this is probably one of the easier seed beaded bezels that you can do. Not the easiest, but also not the most difficult. All right, so I've made this. You do have to kind of squeeze things along and have it conform. So you do have to be mindful of that as you're working, because otherwise it can distort in ways that are not maybe necessarily your friend. So we've made this, we've made that kind of the right angle weave. And then, as Michelle said, did the stitch in the ditch. And we started this peyote to go around. And so, believe it or not, this is going to all fit. It's loose now, but it'll fit soon. Well, maybe not super soon, but sooner rather than later. All right. So I finished that row. So I'm going to go up, step up into the next row. And then I'm going to continue around one more time with the size 11s. And this will, let me see if I got this tangled anywhere. I did not have that tangled. Good job. Good job. And so I'm going to do another row of the size 11 and just going around and adding those beads in between the gaps. You will want to make sure that you're pulling it out tight enough that these beads here, where is it? You want it so that these beads are next to each other like this. That's the ideal. So because we're doing a decrease, if you don't do that, you're not going to get a real decrease. So you want to make sure that they're kind of sistering up next to each other, so that you're getting that full decrease, and that it's gonna capture your piece in place. So if they're staggered like this, what's gonna happen is that when you pull, it's not gonna have that same decrease effect. I mean, if it's a little bit off, it's not the end of the world, but at the end of the day, we want this to actually work. And if it doesn't, then you have to redo it. Michelle says, this is great, Andrew, especially for beaters like me who can't do metal or other types of things. I hope people have been enjoying this. I've been trying to do a lot of seed beading, and there's two reasons. For one, we're getting a bunch of vintage seed beads, some more in. I found a source. I'm getting a bunch of beads in, and so we'll have them. So, I like to show people what they can do with the stuff that we have. I mean, I have a lot of seed beads at the cottage, but they are kind of make up our background. So I don't want to mess with that because it's kind of a pain in the butt to redo the background for our videos and stuff. So in theory, I have bunches and bunches of seed beads, but I got some more, and we'll be parceling out those so that we can sell them. And the other reason, which is kind of the main reason why I started doing these, is because we're down to one car until we get the tires fixed on the minivan. So I haven't been able to go to the cottage as much. So because of that, I haven't been able. Most of my tools and stuff are over at the cottage, and so I just did this thing where I'm gonna go through right now and make sure that those are sitting next to each other. So seed beading is really a lovely thing because it's relatively portable. You can have a whole 50 hours worth of fun, and it can all fit in a shoebox, or not even a shoebox, a Tupperware container. And like what Bonnie said, seed beads are easy to take along projects to do on the road. Yeah, not always easy if you're driving, but I mean, not you, of course, but like I've done things where William was driving and I was trying to do some seed beading, and it was kind of it didn't work out so great. You hit the brakes and then they go everywhere. But like if you are flying, for example, you don't have to like max out your weight capacity on your projects, on your suitcase. So all I'm doing right now is I'm going through and I'm tightening up. I do want to make sure that as I'm going, like I said, that those beads are sitting next to each other in a way that it's not going to, so that it does decrease it. We're cinching in the beadwork, and this is what's going to keep your stone, or in this case, your plastic cabochon, in place. It's tightening up that tension. It does kind of feel weird right now. It's kind of like a weird, I don't know how to describe that. It's kind of like a weird little mouth with teeth right now. And it feels weird. Like it doesn't look like it should work, but it's slowly coming around. Like I feel like with seed beading, the more you work on certain projects and the further you get in them, the more it kind of makes sense. Now, this is where, when I talk about being loosey goosey, you can kind of see where it's important to get that tension just right. Because if you get it too tight, it's not going to want to act right, so to speak. So we do have to train the beads to want to fall in the right space, because they do. The tension is going to want to push them up in certain ways, and this is going to be what's going to form the base. So it's going to kind of look like that. Of course, it's going to be a little bit tighter, but you can see why we added a little bit extra length, so that there's enough room on this side so that when we bring this side in, you're able to accommodate the stone. All right, so I've reached the end of my row, and I'm going to step up to the next row on the size 11, and then I'm going to start adding the 15s. And one of the reasons why I did this kind of multiple color scheme is so that you can see it. Because sometimes I like to do color on color, the same color, but for teaching purposes, that is not always ideal. And this is where the magic really happens, where it really starts, the beads start really coming together. There's that real decrease. And you can kind of see it. It's all working, y'all. It's coming together, y'all. And yeah, so all I'm doing is I'm just adding, they were just continuing this peyote stitch around. I'm adding size 15 seed beads, and it's coming together, y'all. Let's tighten it up. That little bunt pan shape is coming together. And this is a bezel. And the copper beads that we have are going to kind of form the sides of it and part of the back. So the size 11.0 and the 15.0 are going to be the main event. Bonnie says, how does the cab stay in? Well, when we put the cabochon in, we're going to work on the back, and we're also going to do a decrease on the back side, and that's what's going to hold it in. So it's going to be trapped in that bezel. All right. So I'm just continuing to add these 15s in. And it kind of looks like a Christmas wreath. Now, with other shapes of stones, you do, like at this point, you would be kind of training. I mean, we're doing a little bit of training as we're going with the seed beads. And when I say training, sometimes when you're beading, the things will not want to like lay flat necessarily, or they won't want to curve in the right way, or they'll buckle in some places. And it's all because of the tension and the shapes of the beads and the thread and different things like that. So the goal is we know that this is a round shape, so we're going to keep this as round as possible. And then wherever these are kind of buckling out, we're going to kind of push these down as we're working. And what that's going to do is kind of reinforce that that memory as we continue beading. So as we continue tightening up the work, it's going to kind of stay in that shape more. Does that make sense? It's kind of like you are, I don't know how to describe it. Like, I don't know a metaphor for that. I guess it's like, I don't know. What's a metaphor for training something so that as you tighten it up, it stays that shape? Maybe gardening, I don't know. Having that. Bonnie says it's cradling it. Yeah. It's going to hold it from both sides. All right. So here is the bezel. You can add more if you want, but I think I'm going to not add more and leave it. I kind of like that look. I like that kind of copper on copper business that's happening. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is I've reached the end of this row. If you want and you're really worried about this coming out, popping out, you can do more rows of these 15s and continue to pull it in. One thing that you're going to be mindful of, like it doesn't really matter with this copper, this cabochon, because it's just copper round. It's not anything. There's no picture or something. But like if you have something that has like a stone that's really faceted and beautiful, you don't want to cover up the stone with too much beading. And or if you have something that's like pictorial, so if you have like an intaglio cabochon where they cut from behind, it makes like a little picture. You don't want to cover up the whole picture with beading. So the goal is to keep it where there's enough meat around the edges here that it will hold everything in place and this won't pop out. But it also is not so much more that it covers the stone completely. Now, if you wanted to cover the stone completely for some reason, you could definitely do that. You would just keep decreasing around and around. And then, I don't know, you have to get to some smaller beads there. But yeah. So, anyways, what I'm going to do now is since I've reached the end of this row with the 15th, I'm going to walk my thread up through so I get to the other side. All right. So I'm just moving, going through the thread or the beads so that you don't see thread. I'm not crossing over any beads. I'm just walking this up through the beads, and I'm going up through until I get to when I get to this kind of the middle row of the right angle weave. I want to make sure that I go up, since this isn't side to side like in the peyote stitch, and then I go into the top row of the peyote of the right angle weave, the original right angle weave that we started off with. And then when I'm doing this, I'm going to want to one of the things that I'm going to do right now while I've got it is I've got another needle, so I don't have to keep taking off the same needle, and I'm going to work my I'm going to work that tail in because I don't want to get it so that it's trapped on the other side, because once it's on the other side and we start doing the decrease to lock the peyote stitch or the cabochon in, it will be really hard to get this tail out of the way. So I have this coming out here. So I'm just going to push this through to the other side so that I'm working from the top instead of trying to work through the bottom. And what I'm going to do is, so this is going the opposite direction, is I'm just going to continue around. This is going to stiffen up your beadwork. So, you have to take it with like a grain of salt, because sometimes you want that to be stiff and sometimes you want it to have a little bit of flexibility. So I kind of like this because it has almost like a snake skin quality to it, where it's got that kind of that bumps and stuff. I don't know if you all think about if that's attractive quality or a detractor quality for you, but I think it's kind of nice because of the texture. So I'm just working this through. This is the tail of my piece. Generally speaking, I like to use the tail to attach the like bail, but I'm gonna end up probably having to add thread, so I'm not gonna do that. Um, yeah. Michelle says, I love that feel. And she said, you're forming the shape. Yes. And it's also training it. It's like when you have those trees, those esparel trees, or however they call it, where they have the trees that grow along, like the fruit trees that grow along the fence. You have to train them as they grow. And then every so often, you have to like bind up the branches or trim them. You don't just do it once. You kind of have to train them to work that way. All right, so I'm getting close to the end of my thread. So I don't like to get to the point where I'm working with a tiny little nubbin of thread, because then it becomes super difficult to do anything. So what I'm doing, while I still have an inch or probably 2 inches of thread left, I'm going to do a half hitch knot. I call these anchor knots. And I'm going to go underneath the right angle weave part and start anchoring down that thread tail. Normally, this is kind of what I call finishing work. It's not the most exciting of things. And what I'm going to do is I made a little knot there, but I'm going to put my needle back on because the needle came off, and I'm going to go through another bead and add another knot there. And the reason why is that if one knot fails, then the whole thing doesn't fall apart. So that's the thing, is like some of the stitches are really beautiful, but they are literally hanging by a thread. So I kind of get kind of nervous about some things because um, they are kind of just dangling, and I don't like that feeling. So, and I am doing this on the size 8 seed beads. So I'm kind of finishing off because they have a little bit larger holes. So if there are things that I want to do, like hide knots, it's easier to hide knots when you have more ample size holes than you do if you have smaller holes. It's there, you can see the holes a little bit more. Now, a trick if you get where your thread is too short and you can't go through the tip of your needle, then you can take the butt of the eye end of your needle, or the butt of your needle, and use that to go through the loop. And then as you get there, you have to kind of pull it through. If you have enough space, you can use that. Otherwise, you just take your needle off. Um, and so, oh, I see something that I can't see. And I'm going to get in there, and I would probably use a thread zapper because it gets a little bit closer, but I just use that for now. All right. So now that I've kind of knotted, I've done the half hitch knot. It's really, I've shown this before, of when you're finishing off your work, you just use it and you pick up a thread bridge and you make a loop, and then you go through the loop and you pull it. And then you do that a couple more times throughout. And that will kind of lock down your thread, and then you won't be out, then you're okay. All right, so here's the thing where we start having to put our our cabochon in place. All right, it's gonna be wonkadoodle. It's not going to want to sit in there. It's going to want to fight you a little bit. But, you know, you're the boss, so you can do it. And this is where it does help also to continue to train it to go around so that the beads are all kind of laying the way they should and they're not buckling anywhere. So that's what I do. I kind of gently massage it so that we're training that shape. And then the other thing is if you're working with something that's like super um, reflective, or if there's any kind of like surface that you need it to be shiny, what I would recommend is if you've been fingering your beads and your cabochon and you've been touching it a lot, sometimes it will leave smudges on your cabochon while you're working. If it's exposed, it's not a big deal, but if it's kind of down below, those smudges are going to be there forever. So if it's important for you to have that be kind of pristine, clean your work right now and then put your bezel on so that when you do trap it in place, it's not going to be it's going to be clean before you get in there. So if that's important for you, because I know sometimes with like things that are like holographic or whatever, you want it to be as clean as possible so that you don't, you know, so that when it peeks through this beadwork here on the side, it doesn't like it has its maximum kind of like reflective quality. Sometimes with like crystals and stuff, I'll clean it before I put the bezel on because I want it to be super shiny and not have like my fingerprints all over everything. All right. Hi, Harry. He's watching. All right. So I've come up to the other side here. And now this is where we're going to start cinching things in place. So I'm going to pick up these. Um, in theory, I could do a row of eights, but I'm going to try to get the decrease right away. So I'm going to do 11s. So I'm going to go through and tighten it up by adding 11s in between this top row, this right angle weave. And this is where it's really going to start. You're going to start seeing the bezeling happen. And I may have made this a wee bit too large. We'll see. But I don't think so. I think it'll be just right once everything is said and done. And if it's super loose, as long as we have the right decrease on the front and the back, it's not going to matter if there's a little bit of wiggle room in the guts. You may want to increase the size of the eights in the sense that you would be building up that wall, that that wall there, but that can also help tighten things in place. And we're going to have to start thinking about adding thread pretty soon because I don't like to add the tail where I don't like to add thread where there is not enough room to work. I know some people, they tie their work into the other work or they weave it in certain ways. I do the tie with a slip knot. So I don't like to have a problem where I don't have enough thread to work later. All right, so I'm just continuing around, adding beads in between this back row, and you can already see it's tightening it up. But since I haven't been really like weaving it, I've just been kind of like plug and play, dropping these in. The tension is not there yet, so it's still pretty loose. And I do like if I wanted to pull this back out, I could definitely do that right now, and it would be no problem at all. But as we start getting tighter and we go through the second and third row of this, it will become harder and harder to do that. All right. Julie says, love enclosing the bead. So right now it's a little bit loose still, but once we add that other row, we'll be able to do that. But before I would like to add thread at this point because I can feel it that I'm going to need it. So I've got more fire line that I'm adding. I'm not going to need a full wingspan. I'm just an arm's length, and that way I have less thread to work. Now, if you haven't seen me add thread before, I take my 2 fingers here, I wrap the thread around, and it creates a loop, all right? And then I take the shorter end of that, and I divide that loop in half using that. So there's this round circle, the threads coming through. You take your thumb and forefinger and you pull that piece and you pull it up through the loop until it makes a little slip knot. And then you place the slip knot over your working thread with a needle. I always leave the needle on so that I know what's what. You have to be careful not to stab yourself because that can happen. I hold this down and then I also pull this, and you'll actually hear a little bit of a snap once you get it down far enough. So I'm holding this in place. It does help to have this on a flat surface because then you can really pull it. And then I take these two and I put that back down. Go back down. And you can hear it. It just clicked. All right. And then I take the 2 shorter threads and I do overhand knot to secure it. Bonnie says, I have always woven it through and never tied it on. It's a new technique for me. Yeah, I think that this is good because it, you know, depending on how you do it, it's up to you. But I like to do that because then it's really secured on. All right, so I've got my long thread. I'm going to take off my needle and put it onto the long working thread. I hold the threads that I'm not using out of the way. And then I thread my needle. All right. So the next thing is I kind of finished that row off on that tie off. So what I'm going to go is I'm going to step up into the size 11. I'm going to try to step up and then pull it. And that's if you pull it tight enough, the knot that you made will get hidden underneath that size 11. All right, so I'm just going to continue adding sizes 11. I'm going to go through the next size 11 in the row, adding one in between. I am pushing the cabochon down and I'm pulling pretty tightly, and this is going to help secure the cabochon in place. If you are too loose, you're going to have to do some more rows to tighten it up. Also, so this is a problem. Okay, I don't know if you can see this, but the bead is on this side. If you keep beading and you don't fix that, it's going to be a problem. So what I do is I'll take the needle, I'll insert it into the bead, and then I'll drag it over into the right place and then pull tight. All right. And that way you're not going to have as many that way when you're adding your next row, you're going to have the beads be all positioned in the right place and you're going to set yourself up for success. If you don't, I mean, you can kind of force it later, but it's just so much easier to do it beforehand and make sure that all the beads are in the right place, and then it makes it way easier. Then you just fill in the gaps. If you have to like constantly like finagle and kind of corral it, I don't know, it becomes less fun to me when I have to do all this extra work. Now, it doesn't matter too much at this point with this shape because it's perfectly round. Um, but sometimes when you have a shape that is not round, you're going to have to want to make sure that you kind of designate a top and a bottom or the sides so that as you're conforming the shape, you're cognitive of where you need to increase and where you need to decrease. Um, I mean, with ovals, Cheryl said, good. I was going to ask about ovals. With ovals, it's not as hard. When you have like teardrops and stuff, you do have to do some interesting things to make it so that the beads kind of fit. Um, but that's kind of a separate thing, and I don't want to confuse people. Yeah, so I'm just going to continue to walk this around, adding size 11s to tighten up the decrease. You do, once you get kind of close to the end, you will want to, you'll want to make sure that your cabochon is positioned on the, I'm going to call it the back side, but it's actually the front side. You want to make sure that it's positioned right, because if it's kind of off, and you capture it and it's off, it will always kind of be off. So you do want to make sure, especially if there's like an image in it or you want it to line up a certain way, you want to make sure that you're able to do that. Now, if you have a problem where you're tightening it up and you're getting to the point where the peyote stitch is kind of eating up the gap, you're going to have some issues where sometimes the beads will kind of retract. And the only way to do that is to kind of push it into place and push it up, and then you kind of have to angle your needle underneath and get them kind of pried up into place like that. It's almost like you're scooping the bead into position, because as I'm working, they're going back. They're not sticking up as proud. Which when we have this row, it'll be fine because they're really sticking out and they're very prominent. But right now, they're kind of recessing into the back. So you do kind of have this kind of scooping motion. And that also will, I mean, it takes a little bit longer to do this at this point because they're not as easy. You know, sometimes when the beads, they kind of stick out, they show you the next thing the next step that you have to do, and they're really easy to do it. But sometimes as you work, as you tighten up and do these like decreases, they'll want to go and they fill in the space instead of wanting to do the decrease. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's kind of like I don't know, like water and stones, where the water will want to go in between the stones instead of like sit on top of it. So with the slack, it's kind of like that. If it's like an imaginary force or whatever, that it's wanting to go into the recessed areas instead of wanting to sit up. So you do have to kind of finagle it a little bit. I'm not going to lie. But it does get a little bit trickier when it's harder because you're pulling the tension tight because you want this to be nice and secure, but at the same time, it does make it where you have to go through a little bit more. And all I'm doing is just adding this again to this row to tighten it up on the back. And it is taking a wee bit longer on the back side than on the front because on the front side, or what is currently the back, you know, everything kind of had room to move. And right now, I'm kind of forcing things to conform. So it's on the other, working on the other side, things could flare out on the back. And now that's not possible. So, because it's already tightened on the back. So it does get a little bit harder on the back side, or this side that I'm working right now. But when I reach the end of this row, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over and make sure that my cabochon isn't like a wonka doodle. And I'm going to make sure that it's all kind of conformed in the right way so that one side isn't really popping out and the other side isn't real shallow. It's all kind of evenly placed. Michelle says, I really need more size 8 seed beads. Yeah, I know. That's like my favorite size. Bonnie says, this would be cool to dress up a button. Yeah, I've done that when I learned. I think I learned on a button. Actually, I think I learned on a Rivoli. And then the next one I did was on a button. But a lot of the stuff I used to make a long time ago, I didn't have a lot of money. So what I did is I used to go to like thrift stores and I would take apart stuff and use vintage materials and things like that. So the buttons kind of made sense. So I'm going to go through, see how this side is kind of weird. That's because this bead is popping up. I mean, that's not terrible because eventually we're going to have to add a bail. But anywhere the beads are popping up, you kind of want to make sure they sit down. All right. So just make sure that you're kind of pushing in any beads that are popping out too aggressively. And then I'll go back over and kind of smooth that shape out a little bit more when we get a little bit closer to done. Michelle says, my favorite size is 11. I like 11s, but they're a little bit small. So I mean, I like it, but especially for demonstrating purposes, unless you got like a microscope, then it's not as easy to see. All right, so here's where the real cinching starts happening. I've got this. I'm going to go through that 11-0, and I'm going to start. Really, this is where the real capture magic is happening. Also, I have a pretty aggressive thumbprint on the back of that. That's going to drive me crazy later. This little polishing cloth. And I'm just going to clean that off. Because once that gets in there, that's going to be in there, y'all. And once it gets locked in place, you're not going to be able to to get in there that well. I mean, that's a little bit better, but there's still a thumbprint. All right. That was kind of not necessarily the best thing to do because I kind of distorted the shape, but oh well. All right. So I'm going to pick up and just continue around with the size 11s. And this is kind of easier because the last row that we added, they sit further out than some of the others. You do have to be careful not to get them caught up like I just did. I'm trying not to touch the back of this because it is kind of mirrored. And I mean, it's not going to be like, it's not going to matter a whole lot because it's on the back, but, you know. Harry says, I have many thousands of small beads, but I dumped them into compartment boxes and forgot to label sizes, mostly sorted by shape and color. Sometimes you don't necessarily need to know the exact sizes unless you are you need to order more, or if you're uh, following something, a pattern like precisely. But a lot of times you can play around with the sizes and you can have stuff that you don't even need to know the size. Like some of the vintage seed beads, they are like weird sizes. Like they're size 9s and 9 O's, and there's some really weird like off sizes. But as long as you kind of, you know, as long as you know the steps and like the stitch, it doesn't necessarily matter if I just got that tangled real quick if you didn't see that, so that's why. But anyway, so if you know your stitch, then you can use almost anything. Some shapes are more conducive to things than other shapes. So like delicas work in peyote stitch way easier and they lock in place, but you don't necessarily have to use some. They do look nicer if you're working on like a visual pattern, and they do fit together nicer, more nicely. But you can peyote stitch with almost anything. And a lot of like the Native American jewelry, which is a lot of peyote stitch, they don't have. They're not done with. They're done with rocals. They're not done with delicas. So. Like if you're gonna do like what Michelle does with like the tapestry pieces, it's good to have everything in delicas because everything's more uniform in shape and size. So that's super helpful. All right, so I'm gonna get that. Make sure that that's kind of in the place that I want it to be. And I can go around again if I wanted to, or I can call it a day. And I don't know, that's kind of loose. I'm gonna Harry says, I have bezeled some Rivoli rhinestones. I've made lots with multi-hole beads. Yeah, that's a good way to go and get the job done faster. We don't really sell a lot of multi-hole stuff, so I don't generally work with them because I don't use them a lot, or we don't sell them, so I don't have as a ready supply as some of the regular beads. Some of the shape beads, I don't know. They come up with shape beads like every other week. And as a store, I kind of find that difficult because I mean it's nice, but so to have different options and things like that. But one of the other thing, like I don't know, it's one of those things where when there's lots of shapes, for one, sometimes the designs they don't have enough time to make. People don't have designers don't have time to make or play with the beads to create new patterns. So sometimes if you get like the beads when they first come out, there aren't really patterns for stuff. And so it kind of is hard that way. And then the other thing about that is when there's so many for us, just from a logistical point of view, we just don't have space for, 1,000 different shapes of seed beads. So we pick and choose the different shapes. I pick usually like rocals and delicas, and sometimes we do magatomas and drops, but I haven't done a whole lot with the 2 holes or even the 3 holes or there's a bunch of new ones that just came out last year. Um, and if I had more time, I'd probably try to play around with them. But as it stands, I don't really have that much time to invent new things. I mean, there's a couple teachers who that's what they mainly focus is on those shaped beads. So as we start ramping up our classwork schedule, we might try to have more of them come in. But um, for us as a bead store, certain bead stores focus on different things. Like there are certain stores where seed beads are their main thing. So they sell seed beads, they sell kits for seed beads, they sell everything seed beads. For us, we started off specializing mostly in artisan beads and stringing. So my background mostly was in stringing. Like that's what I was known for was stringing because I used to write for a magazine called Stringing Magazine. So that's where people mostly knew me, and that's where I had my most familiarity was with string. So our store was highly geared towards that. As the marketplace has kind of shifted, um, a lot where we used to specialize in art beads, we don't sell as many as we used to because just access to beads and staying comparable with price is not as easy now. Like it used to, you go to a show and you would see certain people and you would do wholesale with them and they didn't sell except only at shows. And so you could bring stuff in and, you could charge, make your money back. Now, sometimes it's harder to do that when there aren't, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to do this thing and then it's kind of getting to a certain spot where it's getting tricky. So my brain is like, oh, um, no, but what I was saying is that sometimes it makes it harder when people are selling on their own and can buy directly from the artist. They don't necessarily want to go through the middleman. So that is where that is. All right, so I finished my round around here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to step up to the next row and then I'm going to add the 15s and that's going to kind of seal it into place. And you do want to have your tension tight. I don't want to pull too tight because there is a chance for buckling. But when we add the 15s, it will smooth out some of that weirdness that's happening right now. Amanda says, I love sorting beads. Do you think you'll ever sort them, Harry? Harry says, I sort only when I plan a project. That makes sense. Michelle says, I have not used the 2 or 3 holes either. Yeah, there's a bunch of new shapes, and they're cool, but sometimes they're real specific too. So you do have to have like a project in mind. They're not like something that is like universal. Like I feel like a lot of like the roll cowls are kind of almost universal in the sense that they they have a lot of versatility to them, and you can do a lot with them. With some of the other ones, they're kind of, you have to use them in a very specific way to make them, to use them. There are some of the people that we do wholesale, they do have like patterns and stuff for inspiration for the stores. I don't know. I don't really get into using those patterns too much. I don't know why. I think it would be easier if we did, probably. Um, I think it's one of those things where if other people are doing it, it's not to say that we can't do it also, but it just is like, if somebody else is doing it and that's what they specialize in, you want to learn from the person that knows how to do it and not like the rando person that is like doing it for the first time. So, at least that's my perspective. And so all I'm doing now is I'm adding the 15s into the in-between of these 11s, and that's cinching up the back. And then once I come around to the end, it should be locked in place pretty good. I'm going to before I do any kind of tying off and stuff, I'm going to kind of adjust stuff so that everything fits where I want it to. And so that it's not going to be off to the side. Harry said, I used to subscribe to several bead magazines with lots of patterns, but they all went away. Yeah, um, that's kind of the way it is now with a lot of the beading magazines. And that's where I used to make not a lot of money because I was a freelance writer. At one point, somebody had offered me a chance to be the editor of a magazine. I'm not going to say which magazine, but they had offered me a chance to be the editor of the magazine. And I actually seriously thought about it. But I'm kind of glad I didn't do that because not too much longer after that, um, that magazine ended up folding. So, it's not, that's kind of a good thing because otherwise we would have relocated and moved, and then it would be no more. I mean, who could have predicted COVID? I don't know. But that changed a lot of stuff in the jewelry magazine industry before COVID was rough. And then after COVID or during COVID, it just kind of put the nail in the coffin with a lot of magazines and publications. I mean, some of them are still around doing digital content, but it's a little bit different. Anyways, the other reason why I didn't take that job is because we had started the store maybe a year or two before. I don't know. I'm getting my timeline messed up. But we had started the store and we would have had to probably close the store at that point. All right. So one of the things that happened was this kind of buckled up and pull this. So if I wanted to make this a little bit tighter, I would go back through and weave. Because so what when I was talking about earlier about training the shape, I was doing on the other side inadvertently. So you do have to keep this in mind because I did the thing that I told you was going to happen and I did it instead. So what happened, where I'm having this kind of weird puckering action, is that as I start pulling this tighter, this side is expanding. So to kind of get this back to normal, I want to, now that I've kind of finished this side, is to run my thread up on this side and pull this tighter again. And that will kind of even things out a little bit more. Because right now it's kind of squashy. You can see how this is like pulling away from this cabochon and it's pulling tighter here. So we will want to come back on this side and tighten it up. All right. So that's kind of that. What I'm going to do after this, because we've been going for almost 3 hours or 2.5 hours, is I'm going to, now that I finish this row, I'm going to walk my thread back up to the front and go through and then come up on the side and tighten it back up and pull these beads in. You see what I mean? When they start going out like this on the side and tightening up on the side. And that will even out some of the tension. And then that way then it will smooth out to be about the same size. Because right now what we're having is some buckling issues. And I probably, if I would have stopped on 2 rows instead of adding that 3rd row of the 11s, I probably would not be having the issue that I'm having now. In theory, I could just take my needle off and pull everything out. So there's 2 ways of solving that. To take my needle off and pull all this stuff out that I just added up to like 2 rows and then add the 15s to cinch it in. And then I won't have so much buckling, or work my thread up here and then pull this tighter on this side, and that will help conform everything. So all I'm going to do is once I finish kind of tightening up everything and making sure the shape is where I want it and that this isn't going to pop out, is eventually I'm going to walk my way up to the original row of right angle weave, and then I'm going to add a little bit of a bail there. And there's a couple ways that I could do that. I could take a jump ring and sew it into place. This isn't a jump ring, but I can take this and put this off to the side. Imagine this a little bit smaller, and I can take beads and sew that into place like that, so that I have a little bit of a mechanical element to it. I can do a beaded one, and I can do where I make a tube and then put that in there. Or there's a lot of different finishing off options. In theory, these 8 O's are big enough, the holes are big enough, that if I take a jump ring, I could probably put a small jump ring and put it in there and just have it hanging directly onto the beadwork itself. I would just have to make sure that my jump ring, the gauge of the wire was fine enough so that it could fit through and wouldn't like mess up any threads underneath. So there's a couple different options of adding a bail to this. Since I'm going to make these into an earring, I'm going to do the second earring off camera, and then I'll just make I think I might just add a jump ring and then add the ear wire, so it's not super duper long. Um, but I said that's a hard but fun project to try. Thanks, Andrew. It's not too bad once you get going, but yeah, it's a little bit more advanced. It's not one of the basic stitches, but it does show when you combine right angle weave with peyote stitch and you work with decreases. I kind of wanted to show that because that's one of those things where if you're going to do a little more sculptural stuff, you have to figure out how to do increases and decreases. Otherwise, it's all kind of on the same level. But there you go. All right. I'm not going to turn the camera around. I'm just going to say goodbye. So I'm going to finish this up off camera. If you haven't had a chance to take advantage of the 21% off sale, the sale ends tomorrow on Saturday. So if you want to get some beads and stock up for the Summer of Fantasy Bead in the New Year schedule, that's why we kind of did it, so that people had an opportunity to kind of save as they kind of stock up on their stashes. Or if you want to use it as a stash buster kind of opportunity, feel free to do that also. But today's project in the Summer of Fantasy was use copper in a pair of earrings. So that was kind of the intention of this. So, anyways, thanks so much for watching and for all of your support. We appreciate all of you out there. We have so much gratitude for all of you. And so thank you. We hope you have a great rest of your great weekend this weekend. And again, if you want to see me talk on Sunday, I'll be posting the link shortly in my personal timeline about the Metal Museum. All right. Have a great night, everybody. See ya.